Welcome to the Greg Gardner Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are going to talk to Dr. David Shaner, so let's get right to it. Dr. Shaner began his performance development journey as a downhill skier on the Olympic Valley USA ski team in the early 70s. After his championship skiing career and as a result of his worldwide exploration of many different techniques to develop and improve his performance, he attended the University of Hawaii for his master's and doctorate in Eastern culture and philosophy. His doctoral thesis on the Japanese body-mind experience was written at Harvard University. During this time, and as a result of his relentless pursuit of multicultural ideas around peak performance and incremental improvement, he began his study of Ki Aikido. And when I say Ki, think the Chinese Qi, but we'll talk a lot more about this when we start our discussion. As a martial artist, he is an 8th degree black belt in Ki development Aikido. Folks, there are not many 8th degree black belts of this martial art in the world. Shaner Sensei is the chief instructor of the Eastern Ki Federation and is the Japan headquarters, or in Japanese, Kino Kinkyukai, advisor to the Eastern Europe, Russia Ki Aikido Federation. Using these skills, or really using this way of life that we'll talk about in this podcast, Dr. Shaner became a Fulbright scholar. He's taught at Harvard. He's been a sheriff in Aspen, Colorado, a professor of Asian studies and now professor emeritus at Furman University, a consultant with the Alexander Proudfoot consulting firm, and later the founder and leader of his own consulting firm, Connect LLC. He consults Fortune 500 organization, and his clients include Nissan, Mitsubishi, Schlesinger Golf, Umbro Sports, Frito-Lay, Duracell, Gillette, Nationwide Insurance, and that's just a handful. In addition to being the author of 4 books of his own, he is also the founder and editor of a 37-book series about understanding the biological basis of productive learning and behavior. This series includes well-known scholars and authors from all over the world. Dr. Shaner has met with world leaders from Indira Gandhi, the past Prime Minister of India, to Prince Akihito and Princess Michiko of Japan, as well as state and nationally elected officials. He is a frequent keynote speaker in the U.S., Japan, Europe, and Russia. He's been a commentator on national public television, CNN, NBC, and he has a TED Talk out there. And I'll make sure I point that out in the show notes. As a result of all this experience, he originated the 7 Arts Change process. This process draws upon lessons learned from world-class athletic performance, approaches to performance improvement from many different cultures, but they're all deeply rooted in a solid understanding of the biological and evolutionary basis for behavior. All this, and somehow, he has time to spend with us. I know him as a sensei, a friend, and I worked in his consulting organization early in my career, an experience I call my living MBA. He is truly one of the most interesting people I've ever known. His latest book is entitled Living with the Wind at Your Back. Before we begin our discussion, I want to play his Living with the Wind at Your Back trailer to set up our discussion. I'll link this video as well. So here is Dr. Shaner in his own words.
Imagine what your life would be like if each day you felt as though the entire universe was working with you as a steady, powerful, and uplifting ally. Do you think this kind of life is actually possible? Well, it is possible. And understanding how to live this way is as simple as it is profound. The universe has a rhythm, and when you learn to think and act in accord with that rhythm, you begin to live as though your sail is always full. You are living with the wind at your back. Our experience of life is shared. We see, hear, taste, touch, feel, and think about a world that we have in common. However, how we react to the world around us can lead us down 2 paths. We can either interpret ourselves as being alone, not good enough, or a victim of our circumstances, or we can learn how to be connected and choose to be a positive, empowered individual possessing the tools to live our life in accord with our highest values and aspirations. In my new book, Living with the Wind at Your Back, I describe 7 arts to positively transform your life. The 7 arts include the art of preparation, the art of compassion, the art of responsibility, the art of relaxation, the art of conscious action, the art of living naturally, and the art of service. While the 7 arts exercises will serve as your toolkit, it is your own personal experience that will serve as both beacon and benchmark, helping you to make steady progress towards your goals. The 7 arts change process enables you to navigate the ups and downs of your daily life because you will be living in complete harmony with the principles of the universe. I tell stories in this book, drawing from my own eclectic path as a ski racer, a student of the martial art of Ki-Aikido, a professor of Asian studies and philosophy, and as a performance development consultant, helping to improve the performance of Fortune 500 businesses as well as professional athletes and musicians. Throughout my journey, I was asking simple questions and then learning to discover answers by actually testing them. I was looking for universal principles that are practical and work when applied against the test of my own daily life experience. You have to put your answers to the test to see if they really work by applying them at home, at work, and at play. Let's keep it simple. It's possible to go on a personal development retreat for a few days to better yourself, but it is a temporary relief away from the real challenges of your daily life. Lasting change requires a toolkit for daily life, not retreat life. The 7 arts provides the tools of patience and discipline, cultivated drop by drop in the midst of our real life challenges. All that is necessary is for you to put yourself in the right rhythm and relationship with the universe that supports your very existence at every single moment. The truth is, the universe always is and has always been at your back. You are never truly separate and alone. At every precious moment, your life is sustained by your deep connection to the single unifying force of the universe. The good news is that you can experience this connection for yourself. Practicing the 7 arts will enable you to function and live in accord with the rhythm of the universe. This is living with the wind at your back. I wish you well on your journey of positive self-transformation.
Dr. Shaner, welcome to the Greg Gardner podcast. So glad you're here.
Well, thanks, Greg. That was quite an introduction. Like I can't be that guy. It just,
You are that
much.
guy.
You know, when I hear all that, I'm reminded, I guess the first thing I wanted to say is I've just been blessed to have wonderful teachers in a variety of disciplines. You know, you do an introduction like that, it kind of makes me feel uncomfortable, like, whoa, how's that possible? But then I just kind of retrace my life, and I've just been blessed by having some of the best teachers in the world in a great variety of disciplines. So I just feel grateful. Anyway, it's great to be here. It's great to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
That's great. And so what I wanted to start with is really reaching way back and telling us about your history, where you grew up, what your childhood was like, your parents were like, your siblings. Just a basic primer on who Dr. David Shaner is.
Okay. So you want to go back to childhood?
Yeah, childhood.
Okay. All right. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up on a farm. My father was a child of the Depression, so I always grew up kind of with this worldview of scarcity and yet abundance. Because, this goes back. When he grew up, it was the Depression. My grandfather was a foreman in a steel mill in Western Pennsylvania, and working in a steel mill during the Depression was kind of like an oxymoron. So basically, if it weren't for the fellow veterans, World War I veterans that served with my grandfather, my family had a hard time eating. So those farmers would bring food that my grandmother would can, suffice it to say, my father grew up knowing what hunger was like. And so when we grew up on a farm, there was kind of this abundance because he had this mammoth vegetable garden. And, the reason why we had a farm is he got drafted during World War II, and he happened to do well in math and science on the entrance exam. And they said, do you want to be a doctor or a dentist? And he had 24 hours to decide before they would ship him off to either medical school or dental school. So from Western Pennsylvania, they shipped him off to the University of Illinois Dental School, and that's why I grew up in the Midwest. And my father was a practicing dentist. Life was, we worked. We had animals, and animals need to be tended to 24/7. They don't take holidays. So I grew up with this work ethic of, getting up very early in the morning, feeding the animals, doing your chores, going to school, that kind of thing. So that was my early childhood.
Yeah, and when did you realize that you were an athlete?
Oh man, well so far I haven't talked about my mother, but my father was a great athlete. He was, for a while there, he was the leading rusher of Bucknell University way back in the day. He was an All-American football and basketball player, baseball. And so I always kind of grew up in the shadow of my father's superiority in things athletic. I was more interested in athletics than the farm. I had two older sisters, and they were really interested in horses and horseback riding and things like 4-H. But I was interested in athletics as my father was, but I always knew, or I always felt like he was a better athlete than I was. And so early on, I loved athletics, and I wanted to be, better and better and better. So I was always looking for ways to improve my abilities. At that time in high school, it would have been, football, basketball, that kind of stuff. But I also was interested in skiing. So my father never skied. My parents didn't ski, nor did they do Aikido. So I think somehow the migration to skiing and Aikido was, well, here's something my dad's not good at.
Oh, interesting. So you,
Yep.
how did you come across skiing? If your parents didn't ski, did you go with a friend, or how did that work?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was the quintessential. I'm the friend of the guy whose parents ski. So believe it or not, I learned to ski on ice, which is what you do in the Midwest, and that's actually really good training for ski racing. But they would also go on trips to Aspen, for example, and I got to be the kid that went with, the other kid and his parents. So definitely I fell in love with skiing and later ski racing for sure.
And when did you realize, what, I think I might be really good at this?
Well, I think skiing, I somehow picked up on skiing, and the faster, the better. So there was something about not being afraid of speed, just loving that. When you grow up, I'm sure you and your listeners, when you grow up, you have heroes. They might be musical heroes or athletic heroes or whatever. Kids have heroes. Mine happened to be Jean-Claude Keely, who won 3 gold medals in the 1968 Winter Olympics when I was 14 years old. And in those Olympics, everyone, well, now I'm we're older, so maybe everyone doesn't remember the name Jean-Claude Keely. But there was a guy by the name of Karl Franz who came in second twice. He had 2 silver medals. I'm like, no one's ever heard of Karl Franz, but everyone knows Jean-Claude Keely. And the difference between in a World Cup downhill race or slalom or GS can be thousandths of a second. Literally, the difference between first place and 10th place could be a second and a half over a course that might be 3 miles long with the average speeds of over 60 miles an hour. Average. So in some World Cup downhill races, you're going 80, 85, even 90 miles an hour at certain places in the courses. So to be able to win consistently by that small margin, I was like immediately impressed and in the psychological aspects of this. So when Jean-Claude Keely was done, they said, Jean-Claude, what's the key to your success? He says, I do yoga, breathing, meditation. Now think about that. It's 1968. So that was like the beginning of sports psychology for ski racing. So through that, I said, well, if it's good enough for the world champion, maybe it's good enough for me. And so I started investigating these things, breathing, meditation, because I had this dream. I wanted to be a world champion too. And I figured, well, success leaves clues. So why not do what, the world champion does? And shortly thereafter, I had a number of experiences in my early childhood that had something to do with Asia. And so things just kind of clicked. This kind of Jean-Claude Keely version of yoga and meditation when I was only, a young teenager, that was typical of these various touch points that I had growing up, introducing myself to Asia.
So really, as a result of looking up to your heroes in the ski world, that's kind of what led you into your emphasis on Eastern thought, Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, it actually started earlier than that. So here's an interesting story. I don't know if this is going down a wormhole or not, but you know how you grow up and you grow up in a family, around the world, wherever you are, and you're probably going to adopt the religious belief system and the worldview of where you grow up, right? If you and I were, born in this country, but at 24 hours old, we were swaddled up and shipped off to our new family in some other country, English wouldn't be our native language, and we may not see the world in any way like we see it as a result of our upbringing. Well, in my case, my parents went to the Methodist church in our town in Illinois. And when you're 12 years old in the 7th grade, I remember you were expected to go, as my elder sisters did, by the way, you're supposed to go to this summer study called confirmation class. If you're Catholic, it might be catechism or something like that. But it's basically, the minister said, okay, you're going to, I went to one session, the first session in the summer, and the minister said, okay, we're going to go through this summer study. And at the end, on the special Sunday in September, this class, you're going to become adult members of the church, and you're going to be a full member of the church, and there's going to be a special service that we'll all look forward to, and you'll get your Bible, your name will be on it, and this is the deal. Well, I came home, and I told my mother, I can't do this. And she said, what? What do you mean you can't do this? And I said, well, first of all, I'm 12. So I know I'm not an adult. You remind me of that all the time. So I don't understand this adult business. And if this choice is going to be meaningful, and it sounds like it's a pretty meaningful choice, right? This is religion, spirituality. By the way, my mother was extremely spiritual, where my dad was, really disciplined. As I told you, the military, he was like the Marine drill sergeant growing up. My mother was pretty much the polar opposite. She was all about spirituality and theology. And I told her, I said, for this to be a meaningful experience, I need to have other options. I said to my mom, what if I want to be a Buddhist? And she was like looking at me like, what? But she realized, at first I think she thought, clever kid trying to get out of summer religious study. But then I think she realized I was sincere. And so to my mother's credit, God bless her, we studied world religions. She said, you can opt out of this confirmation class, but you cannot opt out of religious education. So if you are interested in exploring other religions, I will help you. In fact, in my office, I'm looking up right now at the textbook. It was called Great Religions. And we went through that whole book and studied Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, etc. And I always had this kind of fascination with Buddhism from an early age. In fact, I don't know that I've mentioned this to anybody. I remember in elementary school, so I must have been first of all, my 3rd grade teacher was Japanese. So that there's a whole year of exposure to Japan. But I remember sitting on the bus going to elementary school. I was so preoccupied with this, and I don't know where I got it, Greg, but I had a koan that would go through my head that I thought about all the time. And the koan went like this: what would there be if there wasn't anything? Now, you'd think that's just a strange idea for a kid to have. But I had it, and I had it all the time, and I spent a lot of time thinking, well, what color would it be? Well, it can't be any color because that would be something. Black is a something. So I had this riddle going on through my head growing up. I had this third grade Japanese teacher. My mother encouraged this world religion study. Then my hero says I do yoga and breathing. And then when I was in high school in 1969, so it's been 50 years that I've been doing Aikido.
Wow.
I was introduced to Aikido I was actually going with a high school friend, a football player that was being recruited by the University of Wisconsin football team. And I was just a friend that tagged along. And while he was watching spring practice, I noticed that there was this sign on this gymnasium saying Aikido demonstration. I said, well, what's that? It sounds, Asian. What is that thing? And I went and I was exposed to what Tohei Sensei, the person who founded Shinshin Toitsu Aikido, and the person who was my teacher, and the person who brought Aikido out of Japan in 1953. I essentially was exposed to these principles of how to unify your mind and body. And the teacher of this seminar was talking like the people who were teaching yoga and breathing and meditation, but you could move. In fact, not only could you move, you're throwing people around like a piece of paper. So kind of the athlete in me thought, whoa, this is really cool. I could study this and it may help my ski racing, because in this art, you're learning how to unify your mind and body, which is exactly what yoga and breathing and meditation was doing, in the words of Jean-Claude Keely. To help him, he said, this was the mental edge that helped me to consistently win World Cup races by hundredths and thousandths of a second on a consistent basis. I mean, if you think about those margins of error and to win consistently by those margins, I mean, I realized even as a 14-year-old, this is pretty amazing. So whatever this added thing is to help people to really perform at their best level, I was like all over it at a very early age.
That's very interesting, because first of all, I had thought that these things were more consecutive, and it sounds like they were very integrated from very early on. They didn't happen one after the other. And secondly, your note on the thousandths of a second. You see a lot of people that have really incredible athletic abilities, and there are lots of them. But that funnel gets very, very narrow as you get down to those that can actually consistently perform at thousandths of a second faster, right?
Yep. Or consistently perform. I mean, that's just ski racing, but I think the same thing applies if you're an athlete or a musician and you're trying to take your game to the next level. These principles aren't just ski racing specific or Aikido specific. I mean, I've spent my whole life essentially. Tohei Sensei wrote a book once, one of his early ones, called Ki in Daily Life. In other words, applying ki principles. Ki is just the energy of the universe itself that sustains your life and mine at every single moment. And when you learn, just like in that the audio of the book trailer that you shared, when you learn to think and act in accord with the principles of the universe, it's not esoteric, it's not mystic, it works. I mean, you just have to realize, what are these principles? How can I train myself? And so, whether I had the pleasure of working with singer-songwriter John Denver, NFL coaches like George Allen, the App State football team who won national titles 3 years in a row, Tony Stevenson, a superstar tenor at the Metropolitan Opera House, Japanese sumo champion Kuro Sagawa. I mean, the list goes on, and I'm like, you know what? All I'm doing is teaching the same thing to all these different people. It's not like I have to change things up. I just have to help them to experience, as I did in that first demonstration at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with this martial arts demonstration. You can teach people the difference, to experience for themselves when your mind and body is unified and when it's not. And as Tohei Sensei's son says, if you can experience the difference, then you can change yourself. That is, once you realize here's a particular mental, physical, emotional state, and once you realize, is this state conducive to peak performance or not? Well, if you know what the state is that is conducive to peak performance, then all you have to do is kind of check in with yourself, and you'll be able to change from, for example, stress and tension to calmness and relaxation, which is exactly what you need when you're trying to perform anything when it matters most. That is, when the stress and the challenge is greatest, that's when you're going to need to be extremely comfortable with tapping into your ability to calm yourself and relax yourself.
Well, let's dig into that just a little bit, because the Western view of strength is the muscle man, right?
Right.
Very, very flexed and tense, and this turns out to be kind of counterintuitive when it comes to your study of peak performance and how people perform at their highest levels. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure, and it's real easy to challenge that myth. For example, here's what I want you to do, Greg. Hold out your hand in front of you and spread your fingers wide, like you're stretching for a piano chord.
Okay, got it.
And it's just right in front of you, all right? And make it as tense as you can, just, so you can see all those metatarsals sticking up in your hand. Okay, you got it really tense?
Yeah, they're impressive.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. People are going to say, okay, what are you doing? Strange. So now shake it just back and forth as fast as you can. Shake your hand with as much speed as you can.
Got it.
Okay, so that's like, T1, time 1. All right, let's do something different. Now relax your hand. Just let your arm relax to your side. You're just, even if you're just sitting up straight or standing and your arm is
right.
relaxed.
Right.
And now with your arm next to your body, take your hand while it's relaxed and now shake it vigorously as fast as you can while it's just kind of next to your thigh.
Got it.
Okay, which is faster?
Second.
Okay, so here's the next question. So think high school physics. F equals ma. Force equals mass times acceleration.
Right.
Can you change the mass of your hand?
No, I can't. No, I can't change the math of my hand. No.
Yeah, like maybe between Thanksgiving and New Year's, if you gain 5 pounds, maybe you got a few grams there in your hand.
Right.
Of course, you can't change the mass of your hand, but can you change the acceleration of your hand?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so anything that requires speed and dexterity, whether you're a piano player, a bass player, I don't know who that guy is, or if you're trying to hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, or you're a professional golfer and you're trying to get that club head speed to be at maximum when it hits the ball, especially if you're teeing off and suddenly that ball is going, 325 yards. Just think about anything where you need to perform to the best of your ability. Speed and power is the result of relaxation. Tension and stress is literally the enemy of both a unified mind and body, and that means it's an enemy of peak performance, and that means tension, anxiety, and stress, which I think we all know does not help you when it matters most, when you're in some kind of intense competition. By the way, good luck. I heard that you were going to be competing soon, right, in North Lake Tahoe. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, here's my advice: relax.
It's well, that's one thing I wanted to talk about too. And I remember this from a conversation we had many eons ago, but nervousness plays a role, and I don't know if I'm calling it correctly. There's a nervous excitement that I think you can have and you can channel. The first way, I think, is, and I don't want to skip ahead, but nervousness, before an event like this, which comes up at the end of September, drives preparation, right?
Yes.
And then there's the nervous excitement before the race, which doesn't necessarily translate to tenseness or not relaxing, but being able to channel that through your relaxation is, I think, is key, and not let it get you tensed up and make it, like you said, an enemy of peak performance.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and thanks for remembering that. You may remember from your corporate work with me, we used to talk about in a company, there's 2 kinds of stress: eustress and distress. Distress is when the tension and the craziness at work causes people to not perform to the best of their ability, perhaps even be cynical at work, because the tension, the dysfunctionality might be so great that it just causes an entire workforce to be stressed out. Well, if you have a workforce that's stressed out and they don't understand the strategy, the big picture, the numbers, the metrics, who's keeping score, how do we do this, it just causes dysfunction. So that's distress. Eustress is good stress, and that's what you're talking about. You have this nervous energy, and you just need to channel it. So eustress is actually, it's going to be easier for me to flip to Japanese here for a second. In Japanese, there's Toi Sensei talks about teishi, which means dead calmness. That's like distress. Or like, oh yeah, I'm calm, but it's more like you're on a painkiller or Valium. You're just like a noodle, all right? That's teishi. That's called dead calmness. So that's not the kind of relaxation we want. The Japanese word is seishi, or living calmness. You're calm, but as you said, you're channeling your energy in accordance with your training, your profile, your protocol, whatever the sport is. And so it's not that you're, don't get me wrong, relaxation is not dead calmness. And it's not, it's not dead calmness. It's very energizing. You're standing up in front of a downhill course and you're, a few minutes, you're going to be going 90 miles an hour. There's definitely a nervous excitement, but that can't translate into fear.
Right.
It just has to translate into having your mind, body, emotion, spirit, everything working together in accordance with the training that you've done. What you're doing, however, is tapping into an ability to recognize that state of tension. But if you know the difference, right? You say, you know what, I'm feeling this way. I can do something to let go of that tension, to allow myself to be more relaxed. Because when you train, when you do breathing and meditation and you train to prepare yourself to adjust your mental states, that's the key thing. People have to put in the work with mental training. I mean, that's what Jean-Claude Keely did. So I had a role model from the beginning. You can't just, train physically, technique, all this stuff and say, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm going to North Lake Tahoe. I'm going to do this like incredible, extreme, soul-crushing adventure. And I just hope I'm going to get, I'm going to be at my peak state because, that's like hope marketing. It doesn't work.
Right.
But if you engage in a daily practice of breathing, I recommend breathing first and then lead into meditation. What you're doing is you're becoming very, very intimate and familiar with your own like psychophysical states. And once you know how to get yourself into a rhythm of a unified mind and body with deep relaxation, it takes the mystery and the mysticism out of it. It just means that you can shift and go right into that level of calmness anytime. I'm working right now, this past year, I've been working with a golf academy in Virginia, in the D.C. area, with, young superstar golfers. This golf coach, his name is Steve Moskal. He was also a student at Furman University like yourself. I don't know if you remember his name. But he was the captain of the Furman golf team, then went on and played professional golf in Europe for like 6 years, came back, and he's been using these key Aikido principles to teach golf forever. And finally, my schedule was such that we said, all right, we're going to do it this year. And I've been working with his people once a quarter, and it's the same thing. It's like you can't just practice on the practice tee. You can't just go read greens. You can't just work on your sand shots. You have to work on your mental game, as a young person. If you're now going to say, you know what I want to do? I want to win majors. I want to take it to the next level. And that's what these kids are. They'll sit there and they say, I want to be the world's greatest golfer. So what are we doing? They are on a daily, not weekly, daily practice of breathing and meditation, so that when they're in a tournament, when they are distracted, when they hit that terrible shot, what if they double bogey the first hole? Are they going to fall apart and screw up the whole tournament? Or do they have the mental training where they know how to switch, where they know how to let go of a bad shot, where they know how to stay in the present moment and play the entire tournament 3 or 4 days, one shot at a time? You can't just kind of say, well, I hope I'm going to be able to do that. The mind requires as much training as the body.
So essentially, you've trained your mind so well that you remember that state and you can easily get back to it.
Exactly, because you're intimate with it. It's something that you've done. You know, when I start with people, I don't want it to be overwhelming, so it could just be like 5 minutes a day. You know, I teach them a basic breathing, or even watching your breathing. You know, that we start doing that. Just sit quietly, you know, and simply observe your inhalation and your exhalation. Observe the thoughts that are going all around, you know, non-judgmentally. So even meditation is something that can be taught. There's like a kindergarten level, first grade, second grade. You know, when you learn to play the piano, right, you didn't just go in there and start, you know, composing music and doing all the incredible music that you do. You had to start and train your hands. Or how about this? You were an accomplished musician, pianist, and then later on in life you say, you know what, I'm going to take up the bass. And you did. Well, guess what? When you're learning a new instrument, it's the same thing. You have to learn scales. You have to learn fingering. You have to learn, you know, your body position, how to play in a relaxed way, and then you build on that. Well, meditation is the same. It's not like, well, if you just sit quietly, you're going to be enlightened. It's like, no, your mind wants to move, which means, by the way, that's the reason why in various forms of meditation, the object of your meditation, I write about this a lot in the Living with the Wind at Your Back, but the object of your meditation is also dynamic, like your breath. In other words, it's not static. It's not just like looking at this pen here that I'm holding in my hand and say, okay, meditate on the pen.
Right.
Your mind wants to move and think all about the pen. So, but if you choose an object like breath, or a mandala, or a mantra, or a mudra, these are all practices from India, China, and Japan that are part of the pedagogy of learning how to calm and focus your mind. So again, it's not mystic.
Yeah, I think some people think when you bring up Eastern philosophy or Eastern religions, they automatically think that it's somehow otherworldly, but it's really just about your mind. It's about being able to train your mind to get back to where it needs to be in order to achieve that up level of performance.
Exactly. In fact, my first book, which was kind of a rewrite of my doctoral thesis at the University of Hawaii, it was based on my time living with Tohei Sensei as an uchideshi in Japan. That's a live-in student. So what I did is I was analyzing the relationship between the mind and body in Japanese Buddhism, but I was relying on Tohei Sensei to help me understand all of this. So I would be living with him and training as an uchideshi, but I would some days I would get a pass because as part of my doctoral research, or this was part of my doctoral research, I would be able to go off to various temples and interview, very famous abbots of different, who led different denominations, if you will, like Jodo Shinshu or Shingon-shu or Soto-shu. This is just like Protestant, Catholic, or whatever within the Buddhist tradition. And I would interview them because I was trying to understand this relationship between the mind and body that Tohei Sensei taught so effectively. Well, they would answer my questions, but frankly, I didn't really understand it well. And then I would go back, and on the days when I would serve as otomo, that's like the attendant to Master Tohei, I would have time with him, and he was always interested in what questions I had, meeting with these, high profile religious leaders. And he would be able to answer my questions in like 5 minutes. And from that clarity in that first book, The Body Mind Experience in Japanese Buddhism, I developed this system of categorizing our intentional life. I was using phenomenology, But what that means is, in short, from our experience of the world, it always it is experienced by us, you, me, anyone listening, as though our consciousness is always directed from in here, that is, in my body, occupying my space, right? And then I'm looking out at various objects, and my attention and my consciousness seems to be directed. Well, there's levels of directedness, if you will, or what in phenomenology is called intentionality. And so what I developed was these 3 different modes of intentional experience that would help to demystify the whole enlightenment experience in Buddhism.
Right.
And so in short, when we're really busy and we have anxiety and our mind is jumping around all the time, which is pretty much 99.9% of the time, our attention is constantly moving throughout the day, from thing to thing, idea, concept. We judge, we analyze, we criticize, or we like, we hope, we laugh, whatever. But our mind is constantly moving. Meditation and training for peak performance is a way of training your mind to sustain a singular intentional vector, if you will, where your mind is not moving. It's just sustaining concentration on one thing. And that one thing might be your breath, or it might be some other activity, but you're training it to be singular, and you're letting go of all the other distractions, which represent all the other intentional vectors that make up this thing I call third order body-mind awareness. Second order body-mind awareness, by the way, these are all also explained in not just my first book, but in Living with the Wind at Your Back that you've already referenced. Second order experience is when you're sustaining singular attention on one thing. When you can train yourself to do that so well, you will enter a mode of awareness I call first order body-mind awareness, which is a non-intentional mode of awareness. It could be for the first time in your entire life, you are beginning to perceive the world as it is, not through the filter of your intentional consciousness that's directed from in here in your head to this experience that we have of out here in the world around us. So it's phenomenology is a way of getting to understand the experiences that you have through the lens of your own life experience.
Right.
Anyway, it's an interesting way to, well, how about this? We live, in this world, we live as though your body and mind are one. But we keep talking about it in the West as if it's two, as though we're victims of Plato's and Descartes' view that minds and bodies are, structurally antithetical. When in fact, for example, let's say you come home from work and you're hanging out with your kids.
Right.
You're going to, if they are acting happy and enthusiastic and getting along well, then you immediately assume their mind is happy, getting along, etc., because their behavior, their intonation, everything about what you see is a reflection of what you assume is their inner state of consciousness.
Right.
That their body and their rhythm is an accurate reflection of their mind. On the other hand, if you come home and, your sons are fighting, then it's like, okay, fighting is not good. I cannot see your mind, but I'm assuming through your behavior that you have the mental apparatus of a conflict. And
right.
and we live that way. We jump for joy. We fidget when we're nervous. We blush when we're embarrassed. We if we're bored, we look bored. And so we're constantly making. In fact, life would be impossible if we didn't walk around and assume the way people act and speak is a reflection of their internal mindset.
Right.
So we live in a body-mind way, that is, that your body and your mind are unified, and yet we act as though it's a really hard mission to try to get them to coordinate.
And I think
the problem is,
I think what you're saying is, we act like that, and as if mind and body are one, but our philosophical traditions tell us that they're separate.
Yeah, if you're from Western culture.
Right,
If
right.
you're from another culture, it's going to be different. Like the axiomatic viewpoint of the relationship between the mind and body in Indian, Chinese, Japanese culture is that mind and body are one. The problem is, in fact, the spiritual training is to cut through, kind of like peeling a banana or peeling an onion, to get back to our original and natural state where your mind and body are unified. What causes it to feel like it's not unified is all of the stress or the added intentions, that directionality again, that begins to color your world. What you don't realize is, let's say you have a worldview and you have certain views of what you think is right and wrong, political, religious, whatever. Well, let's just imagine that worldview that you have is rosy. So let's imagine you just put on some rose-colored glasses. The thing is, you've had those rose-colored glasses on your whole life, probably as a result of your mentors, your family, your upbringing, the culture that you grew up in. And you think that the world is that it's rosy. And it's not until you reach a different non-intentional mode of awareness, like first order body-mind awareness, that perhaps for the first time in your life, it's like taking off those rose-colored glasses and you go, holy cow, the world isn't rosy. I was making it rosy. That was a result of my intentions, not the way the world actually is.
Hey everyone, this is Greg Gardner breaking in after the recording. Dr. Shaner and I go on for about another hour to talk more, but I wanted to break in and divide this podcast up into two parts, more easily consumable for people. And I wanted to conclude and summarize what we just heard. As I reviewed the first half of the conversation, a number of things jumped out at me. The first was the discussion of Dr. Shaner's skiing hero, Jean-Claude Keely, who consistently won races by thousandths of a second. And after being asked what his secret was, he said yoga, breathing, and meditation. What I took from this was that what gives you that competitive edge in any endeavor, in musical performance, in athletic performance, in really anything, is something beyond physical training. It's really the body-mind state that Dr. Shaner and I talked about. And just like your physical training or your musical training, you can't expect this body-mind state just to show up on the day of your event or your day of your performance. So practicing this relaxed, calm body-mind state is very important. Now, when I hear the word relax, I immediately think of the beach, a beach chair, an umbrella drink. And this is not the kind of relaxing that Dr. Shaner is referring to. He described it as living calmness. To me, this means an excited and confident calmness. And you can check on that with your breathing, with the state of your mind before any type of performance. But the key is that to remember to get back to that place, you have to have practiced it before. So don't expect it to show up if you haven't practiced it. We discussed three different forms of awareness. Third order body-mind awareness, which is your intentional vectors are pointing everywhere. You're going from thing to thing to thing very quickly. It's the state of consciousness that most people are in on a daily basis. And it's necessary to be in that state sometimes. And then we discuss second order body-mind awareness, which is where you bring your focus to one thing. I think of it as getting involved in a singular activity, writing, playing music, conversation. You can lose yourself or lose track of time in second order body-mind awareness. And we experience this at work and at play when we bring our focus to an activity that requires a skill that we have practiced and sedimented. Now, first order body-mind awareness is involuntary. It's when our skills are so sedimented that you lose any directed consciousness about what you're doing. Some people call that being in the zone. Some people actually call it unconscious. I remember Michael Jordan scoring 50, 60 plus points in a game. People, even the announcers, would say he's unconscious. So knowing all this, I've thought about the self-talk I do before these types of events and competitions. Some of us, like myself, go into sort of a self-deprecating mode, like, man, I hope I can finish this alive, or I hope I don't screw this set up, or things like that. And I'm starting to think that type of talk is coming from the ego's insecurity and can really get in the way of a great performance. So after doing this podcast, I went back through Dr. Shainer's book, Living with the Wind at Your Back. And the first exercise is write up a PDA, a personal development affirmation. So I thought about what would be a good personal development affirmation before any event or any task that I'm going to do, even if it's a conference call in my work on a daily basis. And I came up with, I am prepared, I will calmly and happily perform at my best. I am prepared, I will calmly and happily perform at my best. And then I combined with the second exercise, which is find 5 minutes during the day just to sit still and get into that relaxed state that I want to remember. And I just repeat that over and over. I am prepared, I will calmly and happily perform at my best. So that's what I've done. I've taken this book, which is chock full, 14 exercises. They're all consecutive so that you're not hit with doing 14 right off the bat. But there's all kinds of great information, and I really think that this is a great book for people to have that want to develop themselves, whatever their endeavor is. And you can get this book at davidshaner.com. That's David, SHANER.com. And you can go find it. Also, you can find out more about David Shaner at this address. But this is a great book, and it's an active book. It's not just a book you want to read and put away. It's a book that you want to keep around so you can refer back to it and go back to certain exercises and back to certain chapters. In the next hour, we go even deeper into living with the wind at your back. And we talk about what this has to do with relating to others, especially those we disagree with. You know, the reason that David Shaner and I got back together was I mentioned him in podcast number 2, which was entitled How to Have a Conversation with Someone You Disagree With. And some of the principles that he discusses and that he learned from Tohei Sensei, his teacher, we talk about in that podcast. Part 2 will be available next week. So thank you so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review and 5 stars if you think it's good, or let me know if you think we can do better. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.